I would now like to hand over to Anna Ikeda, representative to the UN for Soka Gakkai International and the Programme Coordinator for Disarmament for the Soka Gakkai International Office for UN Affairs. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Zara, and hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Anna Ikeda from Soka Gakkai International, and I'd like to begin by really thanking the organizers for convening this important conversation and letting me join today. And I'm really looking forward to learning from all of you today. I'm perhaps preaching to the choir, but I would like to begin by saying that nuclear weapons do not provide security, protect our human rights, or safeguard our environment. In fact, they do just the opposite. Instead, they are the biggest threat to everything we hold dear, all the things the previous speaker mentioned. They can destroy our cities and communities in an instant and have a long-lasting impact on people's health and our nature for generations to come. So I really feel that framing the conversation about nuclear weapons more broadly and recognizing the interconnected nature of our complex global issues of today actually reflects our reality and how the world operates. It just makes sense. But not only that, I believe it would also help us address such issues more effectively. And the good news I want to say is that we are seeing some instances of such interlinkages, even in the context of the UN, where many things are, they tend to be siloed. So, for example, on March 5th this year, just earlier this month, which is the International Day for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Awareness, 14 UN human rights special mechanisms experts released a statement urging states to address the human rights impact of nuclear testing. And it stated, and I quote, "Together in the face of enduring nuclear legacies and ongoing conflicts, we must embrace disarmament and non-proliferation to ensure human rights for all and a sustainable future," unquote. And this is coming from human rights experts at the UN. Also, I'm sure many of you are aware of the Summit of the Future, which is taking place in September this year, which is an opportunity to reinvigorate a multilateral system that's better positioned to positively impact people's lives. And a number of stakeholders are engaged in the processes feeding into the summit, addressing a myriad of issues, including disarmament, climate change, and human rights. But a great example of how addressing the human rights and environmental impacts of nuclear weapons actually advances disarmament is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW, which entered into force in January 2021. And as you are perhaps aware, it was the collective efforts to highlight the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, centering on the voices of hibakusha and the affected communities, that has strengthened the global norm against nuclear weapons and accelerated the processes toward the adoption of the treaty and the current efforts for its universalization. The treaty also seeks to address the harms caused by nuclear weapons through providing victim assistance, environmental remediation, and international cooperation, which is really noteworthy. So I would urge that we keep building on such efforts to shift the narrative about nuclear weapons from the one centering around national security to humanitarian consequences and human security. And we must raise the public's awareness. I believe, as the disarmament community, especially, we must creatively think of ways to reach out and partner with human rights organizations, climate groups, environmental movements, etc., to protect our Earth and build a culture of peace. And I'm so encouraged to see some of you today who represent so many different sections and themes of the community. So I'm really happy to see that. So I hope this kind of conversations keep happening toward the SSOD-IV and beyond. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you for highlighting the need to bring together the different silos within the UN, and in this case, human rights and disarmament. We'll now hear from Bruce Knotts, who is the co-chair of the UN NGO Committee on Human Rights, president and CEO of the NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace and Security, and a member of the NGO UN Security Council Working Group.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here with you. I'm glad you all are interested in this very important topic. I had a very interesting meeting yesterday. As just stated, I'm actually on the steering committee of the Security Council Working Group. We met with a couple of members of that Security Council. It was off the record, so I can't actually mention which ambassadors they were, but one was from Europe and the other was from the Middle East. And I raised this issue with them. And I made the point not only that nuclear weapons need to be abolished, but also we need to do something about conventional weapons. What we're seeing in Gaza and also in Ukraine is just massive destruction of infrastructure and of civilians, children, infants, with weapons of terrible destruction. And there is international law, and there's also US law, which says that those weapons cannot be used against civilian populations. And they are being used. So there needs to be some control of all weapons, but particularly nuclear weapons. The two ambassadors, who I can't name at this moment, both indicated that they definitely wanted to work with us. And I said that we were going to make a big push in September on disarmament, and we really wanted for a change for there to really be disarmament. And both ambassadors made the comment that I've made over and over and over again, that the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty talks, are useless. They have a talk every 5 years and nothing happens, and 5 years later, nothing happens, and 5 years later, nothing happens. And this has been going on forever. And it really is time to stop. One of the things that one of the ambassadors, and it might have been actually two of the ambassadors, mentioned were that the permanent members of the Security Council, which are all nuclear weapons possessing states, should give up their nuclear weapons because they're permanent members of the Security Council. They have an obligation to lead by example. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think it's a wonderful idea, and it certainly is a beginning. And it certainly would commit the 5 permanent members of the Security Council to abolishing nuclear weapons altogether, particularly if they gave up their own nuclear weapons. So there's some really good talk, and I think some good intentions. I think people are really getting quite frightened. You've got, at least a couple of countries, if not more, threatening to use nuclear weapons. And then you've got active wars going on, actually around the world. And I'm forgetting Sudan, which is just decimated. It's just a horrible situation. And you have active wars going on. And these are weapons that, again, the weapons producing countries like the United States and France and other European countries, they're making a lot of money off of those weapons. There's a lot of money being made at the expense of people's survival. And that needs to be controlled. That needs to stop. And I'll tell you why. When I took over the position as chair of the NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace and Security. And oh, by the way, the former chair was Hiro Sakurai of Soka Gakkai International. And he convinced me that I should take this position. And I said, Hiro, the only way I'm going to do this is if you're at my side constantly. And he certainly has been. He's been there every step of the way and has been a great advisor to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have taken the job, but he's just been such a great support. But we really need to do much more to make sure that we abolish these weapons. And I came to the NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace and Security, having been the regional refugee coordinator for West Africa, and I was primarily looking at the civil wars in Sierra Leone and Liberia. And I saw the terrible destruction that was done to people in those wars, and that was all conventional weapons. And this was the time of the blood diamonds, where diamonds that were mined in both of these countries were being used to purchase these conventional weapons, which were decimating the populations of both countries. And so when I took the position as the NGO Committee on Disarmament's chair, I said, we're going to work on conventional weapons in addition to nuclear weapons. So my plea today is that we really need to comprehensively look at all weapons systems, because, you know, if you're an infant or a child in Gaza and you're killed by a bomb from the air or for a missile, you don't care whether you're being killed by a nuclear bomb or by, you know, you're being killed. People are being killed by these weapons, and we really need to control all these weapons that are decimating populations. And we can do it. This is not that difficult. Um, you know, there were, with the blood diamonds, there were some controls on weapons sales in Sierra Leone and Liberia, finally, after a long time. So we can make these moves. We just have to have the will. And right now, we seem not to. And I'm going to say one last thing. We both were reeling. We had this meeting minutes after the Security Council resolution on the ceasefire in Gaza, and which really rankled these two ambassadors that I'm not going to name, was that immediately after the ceasefire resolution was passed, the U.S. ambassador, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who I know, and I've worked with her husband, she says, this is a non-binding resolution. And both of them said, what? This was a Security Council resolution. It is a binding resolution. And we need binding resolutions that will stop the killing. We need binding resolutions that will stop the proliferation of all kinds of weapons, not just nuclear weapons, but all of these weapons. We need to get rid of them. And at the very least, the United States has a very firm law that any weapons that the United States sends anywhere cannot be used to kill civilians. And yet our weapons, American weapons that are being sent, are being used to kill civilians. And that needs to stop. The American government can do that in a heartbeat. It's our law. We don't have to have a Security Council resolution to do that. So we really need to work on all of these things. And I know that this group here and what we plan to do in September is working on all weapons. And we know that many of the countries that we're working with care as much as I am passionate right now. They might care that much also about controlling or monitoring or somehow dealing with all these weapons of mass destruction, because they're not just nuclear weapons, they're conventional weapons as well. And we really need to work on all of those.
Bruce did make a very, very, very important point, which is the need to also include conventional weapons into the conversation. And that is something that has been at the center of Scrap's work since we began. So thank you very much, Bruce. I would now like to pass on to Imam Safed Katovic, the Director of United Nations Operations for Justice for All and a trustee of the Parliament of World Religions.
Okay, sorry about that. Has some technical difficulties. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Excuse me, I have some allergies, which I guess is a good thing, indicating the change of seasons. So hopefully we'll have a change of seasons with regard to the important topic that we're talking about today. I'd like to thank Zara and our wonderful partners in SCRAP, Parliament of World Religions, Soka, Gakkai, and the others who have helped to sponsor and co-organize this event. Let me begin by giving you all and sharing with you greetings of peace. In our tradition, Assalamu alaikum. We believe these are the greetings of peace that are not only exclusive to a particular community, but belong and are the legacy of all communities, being utilized by the prophets and messengers throughout human history. Muslims also hold that this term, or the greeting of peace, salam alaikum, is a greeting that we will use in paradise, in what is referred to as Dar es Salaam, the home of peace, or the abode of peace. So I know it's not a prayer event, but since we're talking about intersectionality and voices of faith communities working and speaking with one another and other communities of concern across the spectrum, I'd like to take a moment to let us ask God's blessing on and pray to our Lord in our own ways to guide and help us do our part in making the peace and justice of heaven a reality in our home here upon earth, Mother Earth, especially in the places where war has become the norm and killing and carnage is taking place. And in particular, my heart, and I hope our hearts go out to all those peoples who are suffering in Al-Quds, that is the land of Jerusalem, the Holy Land to the peoples of the book, specifically Jews, Christians, and Muslims equally alike. As you all know, this is a critical gathering in the face of what pretends to possibly be our mutually assured destruction from the threat and scourge of nuclear weapons and war. In July 2022, a historic move at the United Nations welcomed the recognition by the General Assembly that a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a human right. This recognition followed the Human Rights Council Resolution 4813, which acknowledged the right in October 2021. For the first time in history, the United Nations has recognized that everyone, everywhere, has a right to live in a clean, health, safe, and sustainable environment. And thanks to all those who worked to help to realize this over the years and the hard work that was done, including some of us who are on this call today. The mandate on human rights and the environment exists according to the UN Special Rapporteur on the Environment, Professor David Boyd, to first examine human rights obligations relating to the enjoyment of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. 2, to promote best practices of the use of human rights in environmental policymaking. 3, to identify challenges and obstacles to the global recognition and implementation of the right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And 4, to conduct country visits to respond to human rights violations. Friends, the ever-present and now more present than ever threat of nuclear annihilation is, to my mind, a critical challenge, an obstacle to this right, because it threatens not only human life, but the very environment, the fragile web of life linked together in what the Reverend Martin Luther King described in a different context, mutual interdependency, enmeshed in inextricable mutuality. The environment, which surrounds us, envelops us, nurtures us, sustains us, is part of us, and which includes both living and non-living things such as soil, water, animals, and plants, which in Islam's teachings are also alive, are conscious, have an intelligence, and are functioning in organized social communities not unlike ourselves, which adapt themselves to our surroundings. It is an amana, not just God's gift. It is a trust in Islamic teachings that helps in nourishing all life, including our own here on earth. Let us be clear, and this is settled science. Any use of nuclear weapons, however limited or tactical, would have wide-ranging and catastrophic humanitarian consequences. There is no way to use a nuclear weapon without causing widespread civilian injury, loss of life, and severe environmental damage. And this will be not only at the time it is used, but for generations to come. Furthermore, any threat to use nuclear weapons should be considered a clear violation of international law, including the Charter of the United Nations. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons also explicitly prohibits threats to use nuclear weapons. A recent example of this type of violation of international law can be found in statements by, for example, Russian officials during their invasion and continued presence and occupation of Ukraine, and more recently by high-ranking Israeli governmental officials, which caused the UN disarmament chief, Isuzi Nakamutsu, recently to state, any threat to use nuclear weapons is inadmissible. Period. These two hot and volatile nuclear flashpoints in the world are threatening not only their regions, but also the world as a whole. We need more than ever for these and other flashpoints like Kashmir, or the areas around Kashmir in Asia, the Middle East, as well as in the areas of Russia and Ukraine, to be made nuclear weapons-free zones. While the use of nuclear weapons is not explicitly covered by the Rome Statute, in contrast to other forms of weapons of mass destruction, like chemical and biological weapons, the use of either of which is explicitly defined as a war crime in Article 8. Nevertheless, given the immense and indiscriminate destructive power of nuclear weapons and their wide-ranging catastrophic humanitarian consequences, use of nuclear weapons would constitute a war crime under several other provisions of Article 8 of the Rome Statute. ICANN correctly notes, quote, Russia's actions have also highlighted another way in which nuclear weapons can be connected with war crimes. Russia has used the threat of use of nuclear weapons as a means to facilitate its illegal aggression against Ukraine and to restrict the range of possible responses from the international community, thereby providing a cover for war crimes and violations of human rights. Any of the world's 9 armed nuclear armed states, and I would put it include in this Israel, could employ a similar strategy at any time. I believe faith-based approaches can complement, enrich, and reinforce foundations of international humanitarian law and enhance their adequacy vis-a-vis the full-scale and different aspects of the contemporary nuclear danger, which is also a threat to human right to a safe, healthy, sustainable environment. Human security, the sanctity of human life, and the dignity of the human person, which faiths in general put at the center of their moral calling and the realm of action, and not that of a cold cost-benefit calculus in the name of a myopic view of state security and national interests, is the high ground that we should all seek to operate from as we pursue global peace and justice. I have a lot more to say on Islam's specific teachings with regard to prohibitions of not only utilizing, but producing, stockpiling nuclear weapons, but I understand I have also time limitations, so I will take the opportunity to stop here, and if there's time later during the conversation, I can bring these parts of the conversation to bear. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Imam Safed, and thank you for highlighting the sheer scale of threat and destruction that nuclear weapons do pose. We will be opening the floor up to a discussion very shortly, and I hope to hear from everyone that's present. But just before we do that, I do want to quickly jump in and provide a brief background to our initiative today by introducing Scrap Weapons and our campaign to set a date for a full special session on disarmament at the UN General Assembly. So Scrap Weapons is a disarmament project developed within the Centre of International Studies and Diplomacy at SOAS University of London. And here at Scrap Weapons, very similar to what Bruce was talking about, we aim to reframe the debate around disarmament, emphasising the need to focus on the elimination of weapons of mass destruction, the limitations of all types of conventional weapons, and the development of confidence and security building measures. Since December 2021, we have been urging support for a resolution that would initiate by 2025 a committee to oversee preparations for the next special session on disarmament as an ideal forum to advance a strong agenda to reduce and eliminate weapons, as well as be an alternative to current disarmament spaces. So special sessions on disarmament were held in 1978, 1982, and 1988, but a fourth never occurred, despite UN member states adopting an annual placeholder resolution recognizing the desirability of holding a fourth special session, but without any intention of setting a date. More recently, however, we have begun to see more strengthened calls and support for a fourth special session. So from Scrap side, last January, we submitted a proposal considering commencing preparations for a special session as part of the ongoing consultations for the Secretary-General's new Agenda for Peace, and we were delighted to see the recommendation included in the policy brief, marking a step forward in our efforts. This year, we were also successful in having SSOD-IV included in the zero draft of the Pact for the Future, the eventual outcome document from the Summit of the Future. We have also been working with His Excellency Ambassador D'Amico, who's kindly joined us today, and Brazil, who at First Committee in October 2022 called on states to initiate a process of informal consultations on the convening of the Preparatory Committee of the fourth special session. This has been echoed by various other states and groups at the most recent First Committee, including Italy, Bangladesh, South Africa, and the Arab Group. We've also heard that Mexico has been pushing for a more concrete timeline for the convening of the next special session during negotiations of the Pact for the Future Zero Draft. So to build on this, we have been working to develop a civil society coalition around commencing preparations for a fourth special session, which some of you may have seen from our open letter. A special session on disarmament is a mechanism which should be of importance to the entire disarmament community and beyond. So many of you may be part of the environment advocacy groups or human rights. I think a special session could be of interest to everyone that's here. Traditional disarmament forums in the UN have not been entirely effective in close to 3 decades. The Conference on Disarmament has not been able to produce any treaties since the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in 1996. And since then, the Conference on Disarmament has been stalled by a lack of consensus, a lack of political will, and a lack of proper representation. As such, it has become increasingly apparent that the current disarmament machinery is in need of a comprehensive review. So an SSOD would be an alternative forum to revitalise current debate to overcome such obstacles. As a mechanism of the General Assembly, decision-making would not need to operate under the rule of consensus. The issue of representation would be overcome, and it would not be limited to a single agenda. Rather, it would be a forum for all our agendas to come together in one place and for thinking on disarmament to be upgraded to include contemporary concerns, including cyber, AI, outer space, gender, the environment, and more. So in the case of the impact of disarmament on human rights, a fourth special session could even be the forum to go beyond efforts made in the Human Rights Council. For example, the 2022 Human Rights Council resolution on the impact of nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands, which by no means was a small feat, but a special session could address a root cause of nuclear weapons testing and its lasting effects in these regions. Disarmament is a key area of action to address these inequalities and to defend the rights of marginalized communities. A special session which builds on action taken in alternative forums such as the Human Rights Council could allow for the cross-fertilization of best practices to further a more well-rounded and effective agenda. Furthermore, the Human Rights Council is a subsidiary of the General Assembly, so convening a special session on disarmament under the umbrella of the General Assembly would also provide the procedural link between human rights and the disarmament agendas. As such, at Scrap Weapons, we are working to build global consensus and a civil society coalition to support states that wish to propose a resolution in the next First Committee in October this year, focusing on the creation of a preparatory committee to commence preparations for a full special session in 2025, and to establish a clear date for the session's convening, which we are proposing to be 2026. So that would be all from me, but I would like to take this opportunity to encourage you to sign our open letter, which will be shared in the chat. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this in the discussion.